In this video, we're going to focus on DEI and the negative impacts it has for many men in the workplace. Now, typically you'd be fed the lie that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a good thing. It's going to help diversity. But not only is it biased against white people in many cases, specifically white men, it's also disadvantageous for Asian men and black men. So let's learn a bit more about this. So now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with DEI. If you don't know, it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ideology that's pushed in the workplace. And in this video, you're going to have the perspective of myself, but also the perspective of someone who's a university lecturer. He works at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I am someone, if you're new to the channel, I have worked at Goldman's, Morgan Stanley, and so on in investment banking, sales and trading roles at director level and quite senior levels too, to understand the dynamic of what's going on in the system, right? So while working at these top institutions, and as you can see from the individual I mentioned here, Eric Smith, you know, you end up coming across all this type of brainwashing propaganda, right? And you'd be surprised at the type of rhetoric you'd have to listen to. And I'll give you an example of that. Of course, what I'm saying is not referencing any specific employer I worked for, just a general theme in the finance industry and any other top industries. So some of you might recognize this image, you might recognize this meme, right? But I don't know if how many of you have actually listened to this, where we have this type of DEI lecture, and I had to tolerate this at top investment banks, listening to mandatory lectures from people like this, who'd be lecturing us on how men are bad or white people are bad or whatever it would be. And let's see what she has to say about white people being racist or whatever. And you should think about what level of brainwashing the system's trying to push on relatively smart people who do work in these high-paying corporate jobs. And is this a good use of shareholder money? Why is it so important for them to push these ideologies and pay women like this, you know, quite a lot of money to give these lectures? And we're going to go and think this through in a moment.
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist. So I just want.
So there we go, right? So she has this type of lecture of all white people being racist. There's very similar rhetoric you'd hear at investment banks, over 3 hours of mandatory lectures. I remember spending a whole morning having to listen to this. And I was the only one who spoke up against it. Even though I'm ethnically Asian, I come from an Indian background, the white people just sat there and tolerated it. This is the type of rhetoric that, you know, people are just being subjected to. And most people are cowards, let's be real. Most people, regardless of race, and I've worked with lots of white liberals and white feminists, they either go along with this as the right thing or they're just too cowardly to speak up. And then I remember we had this specific image shown shown in these trainings that would get, right? Now I agree there is some element of truth here, or you might say a older white guy who's maybe born into an affluent family, who's already saved and invested a lot of his money in, say, stocks and portfolio, stocks and investments and so on, real estate, is from an older generation, I would say over 45. They probably do have it relatively easy if they are in a high-paying corporate job. Whereas a woman who might come from a relatively poorer background, from a different race, she might have a more set of challenges to go through in life, right? But what's interesting here is this image, it's applied to all men, right? So all men, even younger men who are being disadvantaged because there's so much hiring and promotion bias in favor of women, an average 20-year-old guy, white, black, or Asian, they're being positioned as, oh, they're in so much of a better position than women to get a good job, to get a high-paying job. That's not actually how it works. If you're in any workplace environment, you realize if you replace this image that you're fed as the narrative of men versus women, it's not actually like that. You'd switch the positions. You'd have a woman having lots of people helping her to get to the finish line, whether it's beta orbiters, simps, you know, corporate management more senior than her that get rewarded bonuses for forcing diversity and gender equality and helping women get promoted. they have more favorable circumstances compared to most men. So you'd have, in many cases, right, you'd have men on the right of this with all these challenges and women on the left. So it really is an upside down world. And one thing you need to understand if you want to help navigate your way through this kind of sick system is this system is all about inversion. Woman is man, left is right, right is left, up is down, good is evil, evil is good. That's what this system is pushing, because the system is run by evil people who believe the inversion agenda. I'm sure you can look into some of these things yourself. This system is always pushing the opposite of the truth and then censoring the truth. That's just how it works, because it's meant to be this way by their definitions, right? So instead, many young men are suffering of all races under DEI. Now, we're going to look at some of these agendas. So if we look at Morgan Stanley, for example, and I have worked at Morgan Stanley, not going to refer to my specific work experience there, but you can see they have this something called the Women's Charter. Now, every company has a Women's Charter. They have all these targets about hiring more women in senior management roles, giving them more preferential benefits for promotions and so on. And you can go and just check. This is all public information, right? This isn't inside secret information. They do have a bias favoring women. Now, Goldman Sachs also has something called a UK Women's Charter. Every company does, and they talk about all these percentages of improving or increasing the women that have been promoted and so on, and representation of women, right? But a lot of these things, they don't benefit men, white, black, or Asian. And sometimes if a white person speaks up about this, or a white man speaks up about this, he'll be called racist or misogynist or things like that. But if you're of another race, you have a bit more freedom of your free speech to kind of point out these issues. So it's quite interesting to consider, how this type of dynamic works. So let's listen to Eric Smith. Again, my perspective is someone who's Asian from an Indian background. Let's listen to Eric Smith, someone from a African American background.
Why not tell people to check their privilege? Some of us have privilege.
Yes, but some of us are accomplished, and that's being called privilege. And I think that's unfair. It's one thing to be born on third base and act like you hit a triple. It's another thing to be born on first base and still second, right? And again, third. That's an accomplishment.
And that's frowned upon now?
Well, it's frowned upon by people who find it strategic to frown upon it, yes. If you can keep this race thing going, then you will always have a business in getting rid of racism. Even Ibram X. Kendi proposed a branch of government, right, regarding anti-racism. And what do you need to justify that? You need racism. It's in his best interest to perpetuate racism in order to maintain a career. Then there are people who are like,
so that's the important thing. Race and race grifting is a major business, right, across all races, right? You check your privilege, and when you can look at any demographic, right, there's a varying rate of success. You can look at Asians. I know Asians who I went to high school with, and they just didn't study too hard. They just couldn't be bothered. They just wanted to play video games and stuff, or they just wanted to socialize, and they didn't do too well in life. They were using certain substances. They were just working average factory jobs, working in the local pharmacy, things like that, when they really had the potential to become major sources of success, right? So you have all these grifters, these race grifters. We're all aware of Sean King in America. They call him Talcum X. Question whether he is actually from an African-American background. And this racism narrative really is making lots of people wealthy. It's making that obese woman we saw at the start who can give lectures, who is very similar to people, very, very similar to the people I had to sit through giving us trainings around diversity. They're making lots of money giving these lectures. They're making money from books, from government hiring them. And I remember being at university, and if you're new to the channel, again, I studied at LSE, which is London School of Economics, which is a relatively good university in the world. Actually, it's kind of highly ranked. Now, I remember seeing certain individuals there who are women of different racial backgrounds, and they would try to leverage that in every way. They were always protesting about one thing or the other, always complaining about one thing or the other. Every time there was an incident that they wanted to get more involved in terms of the university student management. Anytime a white man spoke up, they'd be like, oh, this guy's being racist, it's racially motivated, it's misogynist, things like that. This system has mobilized and activated the most worst kinds of people and behavior. And I don't mean that based on race or gender. I mean that based on, oh, I'm a victim, anything I can flip into a victim narrative, rather than prioritizing people who are actually skilled and competent at the job, right? Now, there's many examples of this, and he's dealt with something similar to what I have dealt with in the workplace environment. So let's listen to more of what you have to say.
Yes. After a training where you hear things about, right, microaggressions. If you ask somebody what they do for a living, somehow that's racist, right? If you learn that, then why would you take a chance?
I better not talk to Eric because I might say something wrong.
Precisely.
Any other ideas about this not working?
Well, if you compel people, you know, to go to certain things just out of pure resentment, they may, you know, back away and rebel. I saw that myself even when I was doing diversity training that wasn't especially woke.
All this money is spent, all these courses, all this time. Why doesn't it get the results they want?
Well, it might be getting the results they want. Depends on who you mean by they.
Why doesn't it bring racial harmony to the office?
Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, those words don't mean what most people think they mean. Diversity is diversity of bodies, of skin color, ethnicity, not of thought. You can have many different bodies, but they have to be, you know, basically on the same page ideologically. That page is often something akin to critical social justice. Inclusion means, well, you can't make people uncomfortable. And in a world of microaggressions, that's easy to do. So now inclusion means I'm going to silence myself and not talk to the black people, right? And equity, as most people know, does not mean equality. It means equality of outcome, right? We have to make sure everybody ends up the same place, no matter how they got there, which is why we get rid of aptitude tests, which is why we get rid of AP classes, which is why we have equitable math and things like that. That's equity.
Because there were too many Asians and whites in the AP class.
Apparently, or not enough black people. And that's interesting.
So what ends up happening is this system ends up effectively forcing people into work or roles that they might not be interested in, right? So you might have, oh, well, women are underrepresented in STEM, right? So let's push women to STEM even if they don't want that, right? And that's where you see all this brainwashing to push people in directions they're not comfortable with, right? Because this system wants people who are ideologically aligned with them, not people who are actually good at the job, right? So this whole theme about microaggressions, you see it particularly between men and women. Almost anything a man can say could be misinterpreted, or there could be a spin on it if a woman wants to play the victim narrative. And then it's easy to cancel the man and say he's this, he's that, right? There's lots of mandatory trainings you have to sit through. I remember during the lockdown period, as I mentioned, that 3-hour race training about race baiting propaganda. I was the only one to speak up against it. And then there were multiple other trainings from the demographic I always mention, the AWFL, affluent white female liberal, who would be like typically the middle-aged white woman who'd be lecturing everybody on how the way they should communicate, or how they should conduct themselves, or what their emotions should be at work, you know. It's just this never-ending kind of, like I say, weird infantilization or domestication of men or many people in the workplace, where you have to get this lecturing from this demographic on how you should conduct yourself, how you should speak, how you should you know, empathize with other people. Everything's about emotions and not like reality and getting the work done. And this is the issue with stuff like DEI. It's diversity of color, not diversity of thought. So you have everyone who has left-wing beliefs. If you have anything that's right-wing, particularly if you have anything and you're not from the white demographic, the white man, the system can easily demonize the white man and go, oh, he's racist, he's that, it's white male patriarchy. But when someone who's African American, when someone's black or Asian or Hispanic or someone else, and they speak out against this system is giving you a bit more free speech to say it, but you'll get cancelled sure enough. Maybe a little, you have a bit more leeway, a bit more grace period before you do get laid off or something for having a different opinion, right? Now, this is the whole point around this liberal feminist agenda and the whole critical race theory, which is like a big controversy in America in the last few years about how children are being brainwashed to have some kind of race baiting narrative. And the thing is about inclusion, right? Because it's so forced, it's not natural. You don't have a natural, healthy social dynamic. It creates a level of discomfort where people aren't sure how to deal with people from different races, or particularly, as I say, between men and women in terms of gender. And when you have the equality of outcome, you don't have the equality of opportunity, which means that if you're going to force certain demographics or certain women into positions, then you're going to end up having a dynamic where you're going to have people who aren't the best skilled for that role, being in management roles, for example. They don't have the aptitude, and you can see in many cases they lower standards in the military and so on. And many companies, they just remove the standard testing they would do for normal employees just to get that diversity, which is why you see lower standards across society. This system is appealing to the dumbest, to the weakest, and it's not really helping diversity. All it's really doing is making really the lowest quality people who might not be the best for the job, but they are the best at effectively they are the best at parroting the establishment narrative. Those are the people the system is focused on putting in positions of power. Now, what ends up happening is when you disadvantage, maybe say men, white men, Asians, black men in certain cases, you create a level of resentment because people who are smart are working for people who are dumb. You might be a smart man and then they've have a diversity hire, or they have this agenda to put women in positions of power, and then you end up thinking, oh wait, I'm smarter than my manager, I can outwork them, I can outsmart them, I'm getting paid a half of their salary, I'm getting paid one quarter of their salary, they're making so much more money than me, but what am I doing wrong and what are they doing right? And there's nothing really. It's just the fact that this establishment has decided that demographic of women, for example, or race are going to parrot the narrative that they want. So they're going to get preferential treatment. They're going to get paid, for example, some of these people who give these mandatory trainings and they come from these corporate training bodies, they get paid a lot of money. They might give a 3-hour lecture and they're getting paid $5,000 or $10,000 because a corporation will throw money at those things, not throw money at giving you a pay rise for doing a good job. Now, as I say, DEI disadvantages all men of color. It's not just white men, as you're always told in the media, right? It's just white men who are being disadvantaged from this type of agenda. So as I say, I'm from an Asian background, he's from a black background. So let's see what else we can learn here.
To get to where we want to go. And if we keep saying, well, there's nothing we can do, we can't win because of the white oppressor, then what is that going to do to an entire group of people? Nothing good.
And what's it going to do if you say being on time is not a good thing?
Right, right. Or that a standardized English, at least having proficiency in it, is a form of oppression. What are you really doing? I mean, if you wanted to hold down a group of people without them knowing it, this woke thing is a good strategy.
Another example, this is a LinkedIn course by Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, inspired by Robert DiAngelo anyway, yes.
Inspired.
Yes.
And this blew up on the internet. Why?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, it was Coca-Cola that got caught doing this.
This is Coca-Cola, right? This DEI agenda, you can see how aggressive it is at Coca-Cola, and you can read in between the lines, it probably is the same at major financial firms, you know, that I may have been working at in the past without naming any specific one. So they talk about racism, what it means to be white, challenging what it means to be racist, try to be less white. This is the leak from Coca-Cola in terms of the brainwashing around race. To be less white is to be less oppressive, arrogant, certain, defensive, ignorant, humble, breaks up solidarity and in-group preference. And what you're saying is a lot of different characteristics, or all bad characteristics, essentially being white, right? So we need to kind of think this through. Now let's look at this in a bit more detail here. In terms of, if you just change this and you change it from white to you change it to man, right? Understanding what it means to be less masculine, challenging what it means to be a man, try to be less like a man. To be less of a man is to be less oppressive, arrogant, so on. All of these type of agendas are pushed on men, pushed on white people, and so on, right? As I say, that's that example I've mentioned earlier, the quality of people that are giving this type of lectures, right? I'm not talking about race, I'm talking about how overweight she is. It typically suggests, you know, other bad lifestyle choices. And these are not high quality people giving these lectures. These aren't accomplished people. They're people, exactly who you see who is doing the work. They're in the audience being treated like second class citizens, versus the people the establishment wants to lecture you and tell you what to believe, who are on the stage getting paid quite a lot of money. And what's interesting is when they do push these type of narratives, they have these type of images, right? And what they will do, if you look at the bottom, this is actually an official document from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, right? And this is all these organizations, charities, these are all funded by globalists, right? And we know who the globalists are. They push these type of race agendas. We can't say too much about their demographics, right? But so what is it saying? What is it blaming on white people? You know, being a rugged individualist is a bad thing because it's white. Having a nuclear family is bad because it's white. You know, family structure, which sounds like a good thing, is apparently bad because it's associated with white supremacy or whatever. Looking at historical things, there's all this lies about history or all kind of biases against white people throughout history. The work ethic, hard work is the key to success, is an aspect of white culture. So what about other people who work hard? Are they not part of white culture? Then it mentions Christianity and not allowing tolerance, even though if you really think about Christian countries, they are quite tolerant to people who believe in you know, Islamic beliefs or Hindu beliefs in different religions. Then it talks about how it's very driven on status, power, and authority. It's having rigid time schedules. having all these other beliefs, right? Now you can essentially what it's doing is dumping a bunch of good characteristics under the definition of whiteness and saying that if other people are on time, for example, then it's part of white culture and so on. So a lot of this is just ridiculous brainwashing that the system has, because at the time it might be to secure the vote for Hillary or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They've got to demonize white people in the workplace environment, to push the race-based narrative and guilt people to voting for the left-wing option. It could be because they want to emasculate and destroy the workplace, destroy the family structure. When I worked at some of these major investment banks, there were many essentially brainwashing sessions or woman empowerment sessions, and sometimes the female employees will come back to the desk with pamphlets or brochures of the training session they had. And it wasn't a training session on technical skills, because again, the system is not focused on having technically proficient people. It's focused on having brainwashed individuals who are slaves to the corporate system. And I saw them, and they would have something like the Duluth model. I don't know if you can look up DULUTH model. And it's all about how men are evil, and anything a man says to a woman in the context of a relationship could be deemed as coercive control. So that's another keyword to look up for: coercive control, about a man taking leadership in his family, leadership in the marriage. That's considered controlling a woman and emotionally exploiting her. And all of these things are brainwashing that exist within school training sessions about relationships at workplace. Why would the workplace go on this kind of 2-hour mandatory training for all women about how men are manipulative? And this is how the system destroys the family structure through these type of left-wing ideologies and ruins the workplace environment. There's a theme of oppression Olympics. And what is the oppression Olympics? It's essentially, you know, creating all these demographics of people who are saying, oh, I'm more oppressed than you. A woman's more oppressed than a man, but a woman of a certain race is more oppressed than a white woman. And then, you know, the rainbow flag community is more oppressed than them, and trans are more oppressed than the non-trans, or whatever. Do you get what I mean? So this creates all this type of propaganda that makes the workplace very divisive. It's oppression Olympics, it's cultural Marxism, and it ruins really having a healthy work environment, which becomes about absolutely everything apart from getting the work done. And you end up putting competent people at the bottom of the hierarchy, and brainwashed people who enforce certain agendas at the top of the hierarchy. And this is the type of mind you have to deal with from a lot of these crazy left-wing people. You have to deal with these DEI brainwashed people, right? They don't have any personal responsibility. As you can see, that's the small part where my mouse is at right now. Then they have very little work ethic. They're very much focused on moral relativity, saying they're smarter than you, of being a victim, of having some level of guilt, of talking about how they care about everyone and everything, white guilt, collectivist, communist type of beliefs, guilt for history, all this type of nonsense. This is what you got to deal with from many employees. And you'd be surprised how many people in those trading floors of major investment banks are like this. You know, how much rhetoric they spew, even though they're working for, some might consider, like, of course, a capitalist system, but they have these type of left-wing socialist beliefs, and it's a completely bizarre dynamic in a lot of these places. So let's listen to more about the exact Coca-Cola diversity training, which I say is very similar to what's going on in a lot of these companies.
There is a diversity training in which whiteness in general was the problem. And the thesis statement, if you will, of this training was try to be less white.
Try to be less white means?
Try to be less European or Eurocentric or more Enlightenment driven. Try to be less classically liberal.
Be less oppressive. Be less arrogant. Be less ignorant. It's reasonable.
That is by no means a white thing. But the point is to demonize the other side as much as possible. Marcuse called this repressive tolerance. Nothing the other side can do can be accepted. To demonize them in all ways.
And the white leaders of these groups pay money to be trash.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage, right?
Hundreds of studies suggest anti-bias training doesn't reduce bias.
I believe that. Yeah, I mean, what it's doing is creating more chaos. You know,
so what he's saying is quite important here, because it creates this divisive environment, right? And many people are kind of pushed into a position for feeling bad for being a man or bad for their particular race. So let's listen to another clip here.
Already?
But I just saw all these medical students reciting privilege messages.
We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression.
Yeah, that's happening. I think a lot of this is performance as well. A lot of this is what people call virtue signaling. That virtue signaling is reaching, theatrical proportions right now.
What made you think something was wrong?
Well, I thought something was wrong for a while. I didn't realize how wrong it was until 2019, when a keynote address at the primary conference for my field, college composition and communication.
Melt to the steel bars of racism and white language supremacy.
The keynote argued that, among other things, teaching standard English to students of color, particularly black students, is inherently racist.
If you use a single standard to grade your students' languaging, you engage in racism.
It's racist to teach black kids standard English. That perpetuates white supremacy.
Yes, that's the idea. Right.
So this type of brainwashing, demonizing white people, demonizing men, and what he's saying is very true, because in the environment of the office, you'll see all this performative virtue signaling, whether it's a white woman pledging their undying loyalty to BLM, even though they don't understand it, or they don't know anything about, say, a Malcolm X or things like that. They just pander to whatever the latest agenda is. You see a lot of people, before BLM can protest or the rainbow flag can have their Pride Day, you have all these other demographics of people in senior management roles who want to run to the front of that line to get the attention. Oh, I'm an ally of this community, I'm an ally of that community. That's how you succeed now in the corporate world, not by producing good quality work, right? And this has penetrated every aspect of culture, and these different standards for different demographics can be quite difficult, and it prevents all people from essentially being on the same page together.
To students of color. So I heard that, thought it was a bit misguided, and said so on a listserv in my field, the Writing Program Administrators listserv. I put it out there basically in a long-form way, asking, is this really a good idea? Is this the best way to go about this? And what ensued was hardly a conversation. It was more like a social media mobbing session.
You wrote, I'm concerned that the current leadership will have you believe that teaching standard English experiences tyranny by our black and brown co-eds.
Yes, so what they're saying is that to have students of color, especially black students who are descendants of slaves and things like that, to, on top of everything, force them to speak in a way that isn't their language, or write more appropriately in a language that isn't theirs, is inherently oppressive.
So, what happens is, even if you are from other demographics, no one can speak up against this agenda, right? No one can speak up about these double standards, whether he mentioned here having a lower standard of English for black people compared to other races in terms of what they can learn. And his experience is similar to mine and other people's, where you get mobbed by the brainwashed mob, the brainwashed co-workers and management, and the white woman who aggressively pander to all these agendas, right, and strictly enforce it. This establishment, my experience at a specific company I won't mention right now, I did speak up about how DEI is biased against Asians and biased against men. I did speak about this with HR, with the DEI department. Hopefully that DEI department has been fired now, because DEI is on the decline. I did speak up about it, but they were so aggressively in pushing these agendas around race and gender, they just didn't care. They just kept going ahead. And just to show you how brainwashed people are, I'm from an Asian Indian background. They have an Asian kind of networking group at the company, which is ran by the company. They said, oh, you should raise your issues with them, and I raised it to them, and they didn't get what I was saying, even though you probably do if you're watching this. And then I had to listen to an Asian woman whinge for like 20 minutes about how, oh, there's a gender pay gap, even though the gender pay gap has been completely debunked. And I explained that to her, and she didn't understand how Asians are being disadvantaged by some of these so-called diversity hiring practices. But that's what I mean. When you're dealing with a completely idiot society, that's why it makes so much sense why men are dropping out, because you have to deal with idiots at work when you speak logic, because this system has put idiots to rule over you.
During whiteness.
Instead of a discussion, people called you racist. Do you enjoy using Western modes of argument to invalidate people of color? Check your privilege.
Yeah. Oh, that old chestnut. Check your privilege. Yeah, that happened. And it happened because what they saw in me was a bigger threat than anything they've seen before. A black person saying it's okay to teach black students standardized English.
Why is that a threat?
It's a threat because when a white person does it, oh, of course you don't understand this. But when I do it, it's a more difficult challenge. right? So they have to, pull out all the stops.
And they did. People piled on. Professor at Portland State said, "Thank you, powerful post," to the person who criticized you. "Thank you, Eve." Eve spent tremendous labor, physically, intellectually, and emotionally, to write his response, and most probably took him extra time to recover from that labor. It's like they're victims everywhere.
Yes. Well, that's the point. You have to perpetuate the victimhood. That's part of the narrative. The victimhood is being used here as a cudgel of sorts to gain power, right? And to try to decenter what they see as what they're calling anyway, whiteness or toxic whiteness or white supremacy or something like that. It's a power grab, it's a dignity grab, and that's all it is.
So here we go here. So that's the final clip there, right? Now he mentions that, he's a black person, he's speaking out, he'll still be called racist. You still have these ideologues that are pushed in positions of power. As I mentioned, different demographics. There could be the liberal man, the white woman, things like that. And if you call this out, then you'll be labeled as racist, right? So you even can't call out things that are specifically about your demographic. Now, and it's always a threat to the system if you're a person of color challenging the narrative, which he is or which I am, because you can't simply write off everything we say as a white man being racist, right? So the conclusion here is that DEI has created racial tension in the workplace, bias in favor of women, disadvantaged most men, including Asian and black men, and also it's in favor of, the rainbow flag community, the political motivations around migration. So sometimes you see this benefit of this certain companies get from hiring migrants over the local citizens. And all these agendas really make it difficult to succeed in the corporate environment. If you want to secure your financial future, I have lots of useful career advice for yourself. We can have a one-on-one session, and there's a link in description so we can talk. I can help you navigate this crazy backwards work environment that you're currently having to tolerate. Let's work towards your financial freedom, how you can retire early, how you can maybe pursue remote work or freelance work. That's all things I'm willing to help you with. So reach out to me at the link in description. Let me know in the comments what you do think about this DEI drama. And there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now. I'll see you next time.